Pleasure to meet all of you online this way. I wish we had met in person. I had intentions to do that, but unfortunately, a little virus had other plans for us. Welcome to this coffee chat. As I was saying when I was muted, that I have my coffee mug in my hand and I'm enjoying this warm coffee. I hope you're doing the same thing. Let me begin by saying that Dalhousie University is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people. It is my pleasure to host today's event, and I'm thrilled to welcome our alumni and friends who are joining the conversation this morning. Well, this is morning here in Halifax, but I know that some of you are joining us from the West Coast and all the way to, I hear, Singapore. There was one person from Singapore. Welcome to Dalhousie virtually. And for you, it is evening there, I know. And so nice of you to join us. We haven't had a chance to meet. I had intended to travel and meet our alumni and friends, but that plan was subverted by the pandemic. So it is my honor and privilege to meet you now. And of course, it is an honor and a privilege to join this growing Dalhousie community as president of an institution that I have so long admired and even coveted. Over the years, I've been particularly impressed by Dalhousie's focus on education and student experience, its role in advancing the social development of our region, and its ongoing dedication to building a more diverse and inclusive society, both within and outside the walls of the academy. The exceptional support that we have received over the past 19 months has made it very clear to me that Dalhousie has a strong network of friends and supporters, without whom our success would be impossible. This network extends around the globe, with close to 150,000 alumni living in more than 150 countries. And I want to say thank you to all of you for your help and your encouragement, particularly during these very challenging and difficult circumstances, and of course, beyond. Over the summer, we launched Dalhousie's new strategic plan, which is titled Third Century Promise. It is a promise of collective ambition, of communities and support, and of the long-term positive impact Dalhousie will have on Nova Scotia, Canada, and the world. That's our promise to our province, to our region, to our nation, and the world. I look forward to working with you all in the months and years ahead to write the next chapter of Dalhousie's compelling story. With your help, we will raise our ambitions boldly higher and take this great university to the next level. So with that, now let me switch to this morning's coffee conversation, which will focus on leadership, including what it means to lead through unprecedented situations like we have experienced over the past 19 months, and how we can leverage those experiences to strengthen our leadership styles and how to emerge from challenging circumstances such as these in a stronger position than we entered them. It is my pleasure to welcome my co-panelists today, and I will start with Carlos Palacious. Carlos is an engineer by training, environmentalist by nature, entrepreneur at heart, and an executive by profession. He was born and raised in Nassau, Bahamas. He completed his diploma in engineering at St. Mary's University here in Halifax, then switched to Dalhousie, where he completed his degree in civil engineering in 2008, and then went on to do a master's degree in coastal and oceanographic engineering at the University of Florida. He completed that in 2010 and then got down to work, which has been nothing short of wildly impressive. Carlos was the first Bahamian coastal engineer. In 2021, Project Y Bahamas named him one of the top 48 millennials for his work in the environment, media, service, business, and as a change maker. Wow, that's a long list. But it goes on. In 2018, Professional Services Bahamas named him on the prestigious top 40 under 40 list. Carlos is a founder and managing principal of several engineering and technically related businesses, including BRON, Eden Farms, and Blue Terra. Carlos has led many of the largest and most nationally significant public and private sector waterfront projects and studies in the recent times. The list can go on, but I'll stop here, perhaps with one acknowledgement that I am so relieved that I never had to compete for a job with Carlos. So Carlos, welcome to this conversation.
Deep, Mr. President, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to a very exciting discussion today. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Carlos. And then our second panelist is Wendy Davis Johnson. Wendy has more than 30 years of experience in corporate and marketing communications and brand development, as well as nonprofit organizational development. She has led corporate and marketing communications at Hamilton Insurance Group with responsibility for culture, including diversity and inclusion. At Hamilton, she oversaw the development of the company's mission, first principles, and other components of Hamilton's corporate culture, as well as its brand development and establishment of its communications functions. Prior to joining Hamilton in 2014, Wendy provided consulting services to corporate and nonprofit organizations, assisting with the development of global brands, establishing strategic communication functions, and overseeing the development of nonprofit and philanthropic initiatives. She held the position of the director and then senior vice president global communications at ACE Group, which is now called Chubb. Here at Dalhousie, she sits on the Performing Arts Cabinet at our university and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee of the Board of Trustees of the Saltus Grammar School in Bermuda. Wendy also is a Dal alumna. She holds a Master of Liberal Arts and Journalism degree from Harvard University, a Bachelor of Education degree from University of Toronto, one of my former universities, and a Bachelor of Arts degree from Dalhousie University. Wendy, welcome to today's conversation.
Thank you so much. I really am honored to be invited to participate. And like Carlos, I am looking forward to a really enriching conversation.
Well, let's get on with this conversation then. As mentioned earlier, today's conversation will focus on leadership. What it means to be a leader, particularly when navigating through unprecedented and unknown circumstances. What we can learn during these times about ourselves and about the world, and how to emerge from challenging times in a stronger position. So let me begin with my first question. I'll start the conversation. It is not supposed to be a Q&A session. It's more a conversation. But I'll kick it off with a question to my two friends here, Carlos and Wendy. I expect that both of you would agree that the events of the last nearly 2 years now have been particularly challenging for those in leadership roles in most organizations, including yourselves. So please share with us what experiences have helped you prepare to lead through times such as the extreme challenges and uncertainty that we have collectively witnessed over the past 19 months. Let me begin with Carlos.
Thank you so much, Deep. And that's a very timely question, as you can imagine. What experiences would have helped to prepare for this level of uncertainty? I'd say the first one that jumps to mind is getting on an airplane at age 17 to come off to Halifax, a city that I had never been to in my life, with my little, as we say in the Caribbean, Georgie bundle, my suitcase of clothes, my game plan of how I would get all prepared to transition to university, and the ability to have to manage my own finances, the ability to have to manage my own schedule. And I did miss that bus to get to Dal many mornings. I won't pretend that I was on time to class every time. And the ability to manage my own time. And I think those are three critical skills or challenges that through the pandemic and through this time of global uncertainty have been able to help for me personally to better prepare myself, my family, and of course our businesses for what's needed. Because those core things that obviously I would have had to very early on as a teenager navigate would have helped to put the paving stones in place for this level of uncertainty.
That is, it's just so nice of you to give a nod to your alma mater like that and your experience in Halifax. It actually reminded me a little bit about my own experience missing the bus. I come from, a Sikh background, and I used to wear a turban when I was your age and younger. And I always wanted my turban to be perfect. So the number of classes I missed just trying to get my turban right in the morning. And your bus story reminded me of those times. Wendy.
That's such a good question. I love the way Carlos answered that. I have a slightly different tact that I'll take. And I guess I'd like to start from the concept of leadership in general, and I'd like to place it in the context of service, which may not be the way that people generally think of leadership. Obviously the stereotype is the leader in spotlight, and that's really not a position I've ever been comfortable with, which is odd given that I was originally pursuing a career in theater at Dalhousie. So I see the role of service being one where I'm serving the organization I work with and the team that I work with. And I've found over the years that the most effective way of doing that is to build a team that really understands how much I value them and how much I feel that their input is critical to our success. So in terms of crisis and extreme uncertainty like we've had over the last 2 years, I've drawn on this feeling that leadership is essentially service, that my background leads me to want to make a difference. It's bred in me, and I'll talk about that later in our conversation, but it's bred in me in trying to do that. So that has really been the most critical factor in the way in which I've approached leadership throughout my career.
Thank you, Wendy. That's very thoughtful. And again, your mention of the team reminded me of something that happened in my past. When I was appointed to my first administrative position at University of Montreal in 1996, I believe, I called my doctoral supervisor, Dr. Don Aspinall in Australia, who was an accomplished scientist and an administrator. And I asked him, I said, Don, if there was one advice you would give to a newbie, what would that be? And he said, Deep, surround yourself with the brightest people you can find and empower them.
Yes.
And
yes.
So teams are so important. Speaking of which, I'm thinking of inspiration that we get from other sources, and that could be events, places, or people. And I when I look back at my own career and my preparedness to handle the stresses and all the tests and tribulations of this particular situation that we are going through, I think of many of the role models and mentors that I have encountered in my life, and I've been very, very fortunate to have met a number of them who have helped me get where I am and helped me prepare for what I had to do now. And I mentioned one name, but there are many others. Let me turn to you and ask you, where is it that you find your inspiration? Wendy, let me start with you.
Well, thanks so much. So with inspiration, it can be an encounter you've had with somebody personally. It can be a book you've read, an uplifting speech. There are many immediate moments of inspiration, or it can be something that's ingrained in you. And I referred to earlier, something that's bred into you. So in that regard, the single most influential and inspirational person in my life has been my father, the late David Critchley, who was actually a professor at the School of Social Work at Dal. And his values and the way he lived his life have informed my career as well as my personal relationships and every career choice I've made, because he was committed to truth, to honesty, to courage, fairness, decency, equity. That's how he lived his life. So I've looked for those values in every career opportunity I've had, in the type of environment that a company or an organization offers, the people who are working there. Because if that commitment, that alignment of values isn't there, you're not going to be able to be comfortable or make the difference that you want to make. So it really has been my father that has really been the single most influential person throughout my life.
You know, as I'm listening to you, Wendy, I have to admit that I'm choking up a little bit because it felt like you're talking about my father. And the same stories, you know, I actually, you can't see it, but my father's picture hangs there on the wall on my right side. And in many ways, the way you described, he has marked my life and I'm here because of him. And with him sitting there, I feel like he's still my right-hand person. Mm-hmm. So thank you for reminding us of the role our parents play in our formation.
No,
Carlos.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt Carlos, but I do want to add one thing, Deep, that my dad was the first Bermudian to study social work. I'm very proud of that. And that has really informed he was an iconoclast and a change maker, as Carlos is. I'm so impressed with what you've read about Carlos. But anyway, I did want to give him that accolade because it's something that in my family we're all very proud of, the paths that he forged.
And for very, very good reasons. Carlos.
Yes, thank you so much. Great discussion. And I didn't want us to all start crying and have to get this. But yes, absolutely. The impact of parenting is just so critical as it relates to inspiration. And I'll add, I guess, that inspiration can come from so many places. And in this digital age, let's say, where we have a little less interpersonal face time than we have in the past, I think that it's so critical to nourish ourselves from many different sources. And so that can be networks, that can be things like Dalhousie Alumni Association, that can also be community groups, and as friendly and as open as a book or a documentary. Those can be aspects of inspiration. I know for me, growing up in a small island, obviously where the world is very small, it's immediately your family. Watching my mom go through the struggles as she became the first Anglican female priest at a time when women just could not become priests in the country. So watching as those types of challenges would be overcome, seeing the level of let's say background work that has to go into the step that you take forward, that is more of a public step, was always an inspiration to me. Seeing my wife have my son, I have a 4-year-old daughter and a 1.5-year-old son who was born in the pandemic. I was the first father to be able to go into the delivery room in 4 months. So from then to June of 2020, I was blessed to be there to see the journey of having to navigate all of the different restrictions, etc. So I think inspiration can come from many aspects of your life. And those are the things that feed into your leadership style. Those are the things that build your character. And those are the things that allow you to serve and help others from a position of understanding, empathy, and connectivity.
I'm loving listening to you, Carlos. It's like listening to poetry, and just beautiful. And the way you put it, and you said you grew up on a small island, but through your work and through your openness, you have made the world your home. And so that's how well you have enlarged your home. And kudos to you. Let's look within ourselves now for a moment, and the kind of work that we do and the circumstances that we and many others in our positions have gone through it is it's work that is often lonely. The circumstances are challenging. Leadership roles can be stressful, challenging, but at the same time, they can also be rewarding. Um, and that's the part that I want to focus on. We often learn so much about ourselves when we need to stretch and adapt under circumstances that we did not anticipate. What have your more challenging leadership experiences taught you about yourselves, both personally and professionally? And let me start this one with you, Carlos.
Sure, Deep. That is a very timely question. I think the most challenging seasons of your life really push you to understand what your highest level of excellence can look like. And that will come, I think, from growth, and that will come from the valley that happens before you get to your mountaintop. So just for example, going through this experience in the pandemic, we would have, as you can imagine, irate customers. We're in a consulting environment. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of tension. Everyone is experiencing this pressure at the same time. You'd have clients, and you'd also have team members who would challenge leadership decisions when certain very hard things had to occur. And so understanding that through those challenges, it's a time to connect to your personal value system that can help and hopefully align with the value system of your businesses and your community. And that interconnectivity of your core values, and for example, ours here are innovation, integrity, and community, means that it's more of a natural fit when we have to determine that we're going to significantly cut profits in exchange for paying the entire company's health insurance 100%. When it's time to make decisions as to how we'll assist those who would have lost everything in Hurricane Dorian, which happened just a year before the pandemic for us here in the Caribbean and the Bahamas. And that hurricane was the largest on record. So persons and entire team members, entire families were lost, all of their assets. So when it's time to make those decisions in the most critical of challenging circumstances, it's the core values that you have set for yourself, the standards that you've chosen to live by, and the ethos that you portray through your business and through your community that'll get you through.
Beautifully said. Just yesterday I was reorganizing some of the books on the bookshelves behind me, and I came across a book that I read quite some time ago, Principle-Centered Leadership by Stephen Covey. And so that's exactly what he talks about, principles first. And I'm glad to see that you are a living embodiment of that approach to management. Wendy, let me turn to you and ask your thoughts on this.
Well, one of the most meaningful things I've learned about leadership and about myself was during a coaching session I had many years ago. And I know everybody's familiar with the Myers-Briggs survey and a variety of other personality trait surveys. And this one focused on your derailers, things that when you're in a time of stress can lead you to default to your worst and most basic instincts. And we all have them, whether it's a bias or whether it's a heated response to crisis or whatever. And the thing is, by nature, I'm an introvert, really quite a significant introvert. And it's an odd quality to have in someone who's supposed to be in a leadership position. But I have found that it's actually very common, as with performers and that sort of thing. Being an introvert is a really common personality trait. And the thing with introverts is we tend to shut down or retreat in times of crisis, which is absolutely not what you want to have. So I've tended to be very hyper aware of this and make sure that I'm monitoring how it affects both my personal and professional relationships. And also, much more importantly, in the context of this conversation, what type of guidance I'm giving my leadership team, giving my team as a leader. Now, the thing is, I don't want to pretend I'm completely on top of this. I don't think that you can ever subsume your essential nature. However, I have learned, and I'll give you an example of this from last year and throughout the first year of the pandemic, Just a quick thing about our team. We were responsible for all internal and external communication. So that means corporate communications with the market, with our communities, with our business partners. And it wasn't just communications with the pandemic. And these are crisis communications because these were all a confluence of crises that we were all dealing with. But it was the murder of George Floyd, systemic racism, the ongoing Me Too movement, obviously the national election in the US, and for our company, natural catastrophes like hurricanes and earthquakes and that sort of thing that affect a global insurer and reinsurer. So we had to keep everyone informed almost on an hourly basis. And the thing is, I know that at times I defaulted to my inherent nature, but thank goodness this was briefly. I had trust built up with my team where they could say, pull me up short and say, Wendy, come on, what are you doing? Just back off here and revert to the great foundation we had as a team. So I would say that finding a good coach, finding out who you are, really knowing yourself can be such a huge help in times of crisis, and clearly learning that before a crisis is critical. But never forgetting that you need to always remind yourself, who are you essentially? Where are you most powerful and effective? Where do you show up as your best self as a leader is a really critical aspect of growing as a leader.
Thank you. And, you mentioned team, and we talked about team a bit earlier in this conversation. And, you are leading large and complex teams. And during the times of crisis, such as what we've experienced and we are still experiencing, keeping teams motivated and aligned is one of the big challenges that leaders face. Tell me how you keep your teams motivated and pointed in the right direction. Carlos, maybe you want to take a step. Go ahead, please,
Sure.
Wendy.
I'm so sorry, Carl.
No problem. Go for it, Wendy.
I actually was going to say, Carlos, you mentioned empowerment earlier, and I would say that's probably one of the single most important things with teams. It's so critical. Team members need to feel valued. They need to feel that they're heard. They need and deserve constant feedback, encouragement, a focus on the positive rather than negative. And the thing is that that relationship with your team and that sense of the dynamics, this reciprocal dynamic, needs to be in place long before a crisis develops. You can't just pull them out of a hat when things go wrong. They're the essential foundation of a well-functioning team. And one thing I do want to say is I've been really fortunate to work with one of the global legends in the insurance industry. And I'm going to quote him here, that one of the main things he's learned is, as a leader, you need to learn how to see and hear and listen, that you just don't speak. You're not a talking head. He says he's amazed that these skills aren't taught as a part of talent development and investment in leaders. And he also has made the point, which is so critical now, that diversity and inclusion in creating teams is so critical. We have to reflect the world we live in and the communities and businesses that we serve. So different cultures, races, genders, faiths, being sensitive to and learning how to develop a team like that is so critical. So that I think that empowerment, that diversity, that sense of leveraging the diverse skills is so critical to being ready to respond to and be effective in a crisis.
Thank you for that, Wendy. And now let me switch to Carlos, where I was trying to go earlier on. Carlos, your thoughts on this?
Sure. Thank you so much, Deep. And Wendy, you also touched on it, I think, with communication, which I know is your area of expertise. And I think when it comes to understanding how we can take on these challenges, how we can keep our team together, it's understanding what culture you have around you. For example, in our companies, we try to foster a family culture, which obviously is driven heavily by communication and then heavily by access. Anyone can go up to daddy or grandpa and ask some questions, ask why this was happening. And we establish the same with our executive teams across our businesses, because it allows a level of openness. And the level of access leads to other things, like whether it's employee ownership, other types of incentives. So when the tough roads come, the pandemics come, there's the rooted culture of connectivity that already existed. And therefore, as you walk through it together, just as you would at a family going through a struggle, you already have the grounding, the common DNA that holds you together. And so therefore, retention can remain high. Morale obviously is significantly impacted. And that's where the communication comes in. And it's not, once again, to say every decision we're making is right, or even that we know what we're doing, right? We're just communicating openly. This is what we're all going through together. This is what we think we're going to do. We need your input. Please tell us, what do you think we should do? Because we're going to get through this together. We're all taking this one step at a time. None of us have a contingency plan or a business continuity plan that covered anything to do with a global pandemic that would shut down the world. So let us all figure this out together. We trust you all to be the smartest, the brightest, and the best. And we know that as a family, as a culture, we can walk through this together. Access and communication.
You know, I heard many nuggets of ideas in what both of you had to say, but one that I think I'm going to take away more than anything else with me from what you've just said, both of you, that the DNA of a team that would perform well under crisis is actually put in place before the crisis comes. And that helps you get through the crisis. And so that DNA has to be placed in beforehand, which means it's not something that you do during crisis times. It's you do on an ongoing basis.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
Yeah. Let's look to the future a little bit. You know, this pandemic has been tough on everybody. There are plenty of negatives that we can talk about, you know, that we experienced over the past year. But I think it's been important, and it's been very important to me here at Dalhousie, that we've learned some lessons, and we've leveraged those lessons to move Dalhousie forward. And I can share many with you, but I'll focus on two that I would love to share with you. One, that we maintained a people-first approach at Dalhousie. When we got into pandemic, our modeling was showing that we could end up with a 30% decline in our revenue from tuition. Now, that would have been a financial disaster for the institution. But our focus was on first making sure that our people stay healthy, they stay well, and we emerged relatively unscathed in terms of people out of this pandemic. And that's where we focused, and everything else, the financial and business considerations were driven through that first and foremost consideration, that is people. The second one, that this is a crisis, it's a moment in time, and it is going to pass. This moment will pass, and the institution will continue. And we must not lose sight of what lies beyond this crisis. So don't lose the long-term view of what we need to do. And we've developed a whole new strategic plan through this pandemic, and we have been implementing it through the pandemic. Those were my two top lessons. What are yours? I'd like to know from you, what are your lessons that you would like to share with everybody that you learned through this experience and that will carry forward after this pandemic's over and help you better run your organizations? Who wants to go first?
Go for it, Wendy.
Well, I was going to say, as I stepped on you last time, Carlos, it's only right that you go now.
All right. So I'll say this, that the core aspects of who we are come out in the most challenging times. And so I would say some lessons that were learned. And I love to parallel it with my experience at Dow once again, being in those libraries, studying engineering. All of my other friends who were studying other things were having a great time. We would be there with persistence and teamwork, getting through it, staying up straight through, all-nighters, running through many, many cups of coffee similar to this. I think those are some of the lessons that still apply in this current situation. The need to be able to put your head down, to do what it takes to survive. That's essentially what we're talking about. To do what it takes to physically protect your family, whichever way you consider that to be paramount, whether that's isolation, whether that's masks, etc., getting vaccinated, and also doing what it takes to survive as a business, hemorrhaging and leveraging different lines of credit, helping to protect the well-being of your team by putting in place initiatives, being flexible, allowing persons who have to homeschool their kids because their schools are closed to bring their kids to the office. There are many different areas of persistence and flexibility that allow the team to understand that you can be united. And those are the things also that make us stronger post-pandemic, because many of those things that just weren't possible. We couldn't have a coffee chat before. This would have had to have been in person. Somebody would have had to gotten on a plane, but here we are. Everybody can get online, everyone can do it, and it's become an acceptable standard of communication and connectivity. And that's some of the opportunities for the greatest growth. And I think some of the greatest lessons.
That's profound, Carlos. And Wendy, your thoughts?
Well, before I make a comment, I just have to pay tribute to Carlos. I can see why he is an effective and powerful leader. You are an excellent communicator, and you clearly understand how critical the open lines of communications with your employees and your teams are. I'm very, very impressed. I'm going to be watching your career with great
Thank you so much,
interest.
Wendy.
I really, really mean that. I guess, you know, the thing is, the last 18 months, and it's going on for 2 years now, they've really ripped the Band-Aid off of issues that have always been there and simmering, but for one reason or another have really never fully been addressed. And as we emerge into whatever the new normal is, I hope desperately that there isn't an attempt to put Band-Aids back on these critical issues. And I'm talking about things like where employees work. Do they work from home? Do they go back to the office? Is there a hybrid model? How do you address the fact that women are in droves having to leave the workforce because of the inequities in the way in which childcare is offered, or the manner in which roles and responsibilities still default to some traditional norms or traditional stereotypes? And also, how do companies show up in the communities where they're doing business? If you say you're a good corporate citizen, do you walk the talk? Or are you just ticking a box because, you know, for whatever reason, regulatory, government, you know, other factors, you're just making sure that you pay lip service to these things? You know, the world's tolerance for not being genuinely and authentically committed to making a difference, and particularly with today's generation and other generations to come, that tolerance is wearing paper thin. And so as a leader, if you're committed to fairness and to equity, you've got to walk that talk. There can't be what we call in communications a say-do gap, and you say one thing and do another. That applies to how you recruit your teams, how you retain them, how you do provide stretch assignments, development opportunities. Do your teams look like the communities where you're doing business and with whom you do business and that you support? Do they reflect the today's world? So I guess we're on the cusp, that inflection point where the corporate world, surely the nonprofit world, the third sector, governments can genuinely make a meaningful difference. We're at that point. I throw climate change in there. It should have been at the top of the list, and Carlos would know more about this than I do. But these pressing existential threats to the world have to be addressed. And as a leader, they have to be within the lexicon of what we're dealing with as we go forward.
Very well said.
You know, we have about 12 more minutes of this conversation left. And I would like to include some of the questions from our viewers. So let me appeal to our viewers that if you have any questions, please post them so that we can discuss those questions. But in the meantime, you know, Wendy, one of the things that I like to share that, how much we have learned about ourselves is reflected in one thing that has happened in the university sector, which actually amazes me that as a sector we were able to do this, and not just in one university. This happened across the world. And I'll just simply use the example of Dalhousie, what we did here, because that's the example I'm most familiar with, but I've seen it happen across the whole world. When we realized that we're going to have to shut down the operations on the campus to protect the health of our people, we actually had a suspected case of COVID at that point in March last year. It turned out to be a false alarm, but at that point it looked like it looked like a disaster in the making, because it was suspected in one of the residences where students were eating together, they were using common showers and so on. So it could have been a major problem. And we closed everything for a week completely. And a week later, we emerged online. And in that 1 week, we put 2,600 courses online.
Wow.
2,600 courses online. Now, if anybody had asked me to do that before the pandemic came, I would have said, no way. I mean, this will take us 10 years to do. And we did that in a week's time. Now, admittedly, it wasn't the quality that we have today. We improved as we went, but at least we were able to get started on this. And we put an immense amount of resources behind all of that. We went from about 4 employees who were handling all of our online operations to 42 within a week. So massive hiring happened, and these people just did everything to get the job done. And so many other things happened that we learned through this pandemic. And hopefully we would not have the disaster of going back to exactly where we were after this whole thing is over. I think that the worst impact of pandemic could be that we learned nothing from it and we went back to where we were before. Not everything needs to stay where it is, but there are things that we've learned that we should preserve and carry forward. You have, I'm just looking at any questions from our audience. I'm not seeing any, so we will continue with this conversation for the next few minutes that we still have. You have said a lot, both of you, that collectively would form just an amazing collection of nuggets of advice for others who are in leadership positions. But just to recap that, if I were to ask you, each one of you, for one piece of advice that you would give to others who are in leadership positions, what would that be? Wendy, let me start with you.
Oh, it's such a good question. I think at the first, there's so many, which one to choose? I would say that you really need to know yourself well to be a good leader. You can't pretend to be something you're not. And once you understand yourself and you're comfortable with yourself, you are better able to develop genuine relationships, because it really is about relationships. If you don't have relationships based on trust, openness, mutual respect, you're just not going to go anywhere. There's a veneer there that that is going to preempt your ability to connect. And so in doing the work to become an effective leader, it really is take all the opportunities you have to have a good mentor or mentors and good coaches, and to pay attention, never stop learning. You always have something to learn or relearn because your circumstances change. And this includes, find out what your biases are. We all have unconscious biases, all of us, no matter what our best of intentions are. And once you've learned that and have developed an authentic way of interrelating with people, I think that will take you leagues in being an effective leader.
Good advice. Excellent advice, actually. Carlos,
Excellent.
I'm expecting something yet more, even more profound from you.
Oh, following Wendy's footsteps, it's very challenging. And I guess all I could say, Deep, is go with DAL, DAL, development, attitude, and leaders. Development in terms of determining what skills that you need, the gaps that you might have, and the systems that have worked for you in the past, and how they need to be modified or adapted for the future. The perfect example you gave, Deep, was the fact that obviously we've taught in the traditional way for centuries, and within a week, Dal and under your leadership could transform the entire approach to teaching in 1 week.
Mm-hmm.
Centuries of traditional learning from almost the beginning of time was in person. And in 1 week, we could be online. The right attitude, knowing that you can get through. Wendy's spoken so much about the team and so much about how you have to understand yourself, be confident in who you are, whether you're an introvert, extrovert, omnivert, whatever type of vert you might be. The long and short of it is you have to have an attitude, because if you don't believe you're going to get through it, nobody else will. Mm. And you can only take your team as far as you've been yourself. And that's why the L is leaders. You need coaches around you, people who push you, who can see that you can run that extra mile, who can see that you can go that extra step, who have the vision that you might not see, because when you're in the picture, it's hard to see the entire frame. The mentors through programs, like I'm a part of Toastmasters. And so that's helped significantly with my confidence. I would have never been able to do a presentation like this with the president of anywhere, not to imagine my alma mater, without programs like that. And then, of course, mentors and leaders within your community and organization. I was initially hired as an intern as a part of the first company that I worked with, who's now my business partner. He's from PEI Canada. And so he believed in me. He saw things in me that I couldn't see in myself. So development, attitude, and surrounding yourself with the right leaders, I think, are the keys to get to DAL.
You know, Carlos, as I said earlier, listening to you is like listening to poetry, and I love it the way you picked an acronym that makes up the nickname of your alma mater, DAL. That's just brilliant.
He's a very good marketer too, on top of everything else.
I just love it the way DAL is written all over you and your personality, and I am so proud that we are instrumental in training people of the caliber that I see in front of me here. You and Wendy, just absolutely brilliant. We have a question from the audience, but before I do that, before I go there, I just want to say one more thing that I feel personally very critical. I'm a stickler for life-work balance and personal fitness. And I feel that as a leader, you will not be able to lead if you don't look after yourself first. It's you know, the comparator that I often use is putting the oxygen mask on yourself first before you give it to somebody else. So these situations become all consuming, but you have to take the time for yourself to keep yourself in good shape so you can continue to do the heavy lifting that is needed from a leader. With that, I want to go to the question, but it flashed on the screen in front of me for a moment. Then it's back. The question is from Craig Arthur, who asks, I'm curious if you could comment on how your respective professional networks and your industries in general have influenced your respective leadership approaches. Who wants to go first?
I can go. I know Wendy's been going first a few times. So I would say, thank you very much for that great question, Craig. And so it sounds like it was around how does our industry mold our leadership style? I think leadership is significantly connected to how you relate with the persons who are requiring you to help them put a step forward. And so if leadership is stepping together in sync, similar to an army, similar to a flock of birds, etc., moving together as a pod, as a tribe, then it's important to understand the culture of the industry you're in. For example, my core business is in development consulting. We do largely private island developments around the Caribbean. We've done about 75 of them. We work heavily, obviously, with construction workers throughout the Caribbean. That's a lot different than our hydroponic farming business that mostly deals with restaurants, very high-end chefs, etc. So the approach to the team dynamics is slightly different because each industry has a slightly different culture. So I think a part of it is, once again, going back to the self-awareness of who am I trying to lead and how can I most effectively come to the point where I can connect with them. One of my coaches, Sean, often says that we all speak a language. There are only about maybe 4 languages. And those languages of leadership, if you speak Spanish and one team in one industry speaks French, another team in another industry speaks, let's say, Mandarin, then you need to learn French and you need to learn Mandarin. Leaders often fail because we want everyone to understand our language. We will have a communication style. We think everyone should adapt to us. But as a leader, we have to adapt to them. And so learn the languages of the industry you're in, learn the languages of the team you have surrounding you, and then you can more effectively be bilingual, trilingual, etc., to lead them to be their best self, putting their best foot forward.
Well said, Carlos. Wendy?
Oh, that's just outstanding. You're absolutely right. The culture that you work in is so critical. So I am by nature a pretty liberal person. I come from a background of giving and social equity and that sort of thing, but I'm working in a very conservative, what has been a very conservative industry. So I have learned that to be effective, I need to make sure I understand the culture of that industry. Now, the exciting thing that's happening is that as more and more young people choose insurance and reinsurance as a career, as a stimulating career, which it really is, very exciting one, ever more so now, you have a great diversity entering the industry, and that is changing the culture. And it's changing the way you lead. And from a communications perspective, it makes it a business imperative to be sensitive to the manner in which you develop communications, the development of a brand. Let me use that as a tactical example. You may inadvertently offend certain cultures by your language choice, your color choice. The manner in which you present something. I mean, there are many, many brands over the last year that have just shot themselves in the foot by presenting products that are just woefully insensitive to various cultures. So that essential culture that Carlos is talking about is just so critical. And that does inform the manner in which you lead and the environment within which you lead.
Thank you. That's, both of you focused on one of the 2 aspects of what I have learned from our culture. And I'll actually go back years. And this is where I think this particular idea began to take a very firm place in my mind. And that's when I was at University of Waterloo. I was in my early stages in senior administration as dean at that point, and the president of the university was none other than David Johnston, who then went on to be Canada's Governor General, one of the iconic leaders in this country. And he often used to say that the inspiration for him is the cause and the company. And you spoke about the company and how to interact with that company, and I'll speak about the cause in our sector. So going back to the question of Craig, what has happened in our sector, our focus on the cause that we are blessed to uphold as the institutions in this country that are responsible for education and for research and innovation. Those 2 are big things that drive societies forward. Particularly in modern times, but they've always done it, but it's become particularly true during modern times, and even more so during the pandemic, where so much of the innovation that has been translated into solutions to deal with the challenges of the pandemic has come out of our research establishments, including the universities. So that cause that we have, and then educating the generations that to come that would make this world a better place. Some of the challenges that have been with us for quite some time, they have come to the fore in a big way. Wendy spoke about inequities in the society. The climate change, you touched on that as well. There are some big challenges in this world that have come to the fore either coincidentally during this pandemic or as a result of the pandemic. And universities have a central place to play a role in that. And that's the cause that in our sector has come to the fore much more vividly than I believe it has ever been there in my lifetime, except probably with the exception of when I was a young teenager growing up in India, and India was facing famine at that point, and the whole miracle of green revolution that crisis ushered in. That was the only other time that I can think of where universities and our educational systems and research enterprises have had such a role to play. So that's my takeaway from this crisis. Now, with that, I must sadly say that we are at time. It's been an amazing conversation, and the sign of a great conversation is that you feel so sorry when it is about to end, and you wish it could continue. But unfortunately, we are bound by time. So this is all the time we have for today. But before we finish, let me, on behalf of Dalhousie and all of us who are listening and watching, say a big thank you to Carlos and Wendy for your amazing insights. And let me, on behalf of Dalhousie and myself, say thank you to all who joined us today in this conversation on leadership. We hope that you found inspiration and insight from today's discussion, and I encourage you to continue the conversation within your own organization. And it is through that we will emerge better and stronger by continuing these conversations. So let me wish you all the best, and thank you again until we meet the next time. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.